How many of you have students struggling in school? How many of you see adults who are struggling?
I see.
So we think about Tier 2 as support for people who are struggling. When there's multi-tiered system of supports, MTSS. It's a framework to think about human need and then going eyes wide open, recognizing not everybody has the same level of need. How many of you think that's true? Not everybody has the same level of need. Needs for what? When we open up school doors, what are we talking? What types of needs are kids bringing to the educational table? How many of you see kids with different academic needs? How many of you see kids who have different social emotional needs? So part of MTSS is going eyes wide open to recognize that we need to do really good things for all kids. Some of the kids we're going to actually have to uptick it. Some of the kids are going to need us to provide additional support. The question is, do we have that support ready to go? In educational speak, we call it Tier 2. But really, Tier 2 is all about bringing early intervention to life. What is Tier 1 about? It's about all kids getting really good stuff to do what? Usually it's about prevention. We want to prevent any problem from ever developing for them. So we make a really strong investment in Tier 1. Tier 1 is all about prevention. And Tier 2 and Tier 3 become about early intervention. How many of you fundamentally believe in those ideas about prevention and early intervention are really, really good concepts to live by in education? So I like to think about our investment in Tier 2 to get it right as an investment to get early intervention to life, to actually behave consistent with our belief systems. Because out of one side of our mouth we'll say early intervention is critical, but then we don't really have a Tier 2 system of support up and running. That means we really don't have early intervention that's accessible to kids. My goal today is just to break that down. What do we mean by Tier 2? It's going to maybe validate some of the work that you're doing in your own building, might give you different ways to think about what this could look like. I'm going to talk about a different menu of interventions from which you could select from to precisely tailor to students' root causes. I'm not here to sell a product. I'm here as just a representative. We come from a private organization. Yes, we do sell products. I'm here more to talk about Tier 2 regardless of what it is. To think about how do you get this work right and do it really, really well. My name's Clay. I'm the Chief Development Officer at Character Strong. Before that, I was a professor at the University of Minnesota. Before that, at the University of Washington in Seattle. My background training is as a school psychologist. Before that, I was a middle school math teacher. And before that, I was a paraeducator and working in classrooms serving kids with really significant social, emotional, and behavioral needs. I've worked at Boy Sound in Omaha, Nebraska, which is a residential treatment facility that produces an 80% success rate with our most needy kids. Kids from all over the country get placed there. They don't have magic. They have a bunch of adults who are in the same boat, rowing in the same direction with a core set of practices that have been shown to be effective. And kids with the most significant needs, communities, I call them throwaway kids. Schools don't want them. Communities send them away. But they can be highly successful when they have a committed group of adults getting in the same boat and implementing a core set of practices. And what we can also scan, we can get you different ways to get the slide deck and some additional resources based on what I'm sharing today. So here's my goal. You're going to leave with some knowledge around the Tier 2 process. I'm going to give you some examples of what we call small group skill building interventions that are designed precisely for kids. For the reason why they're struggling is because they have not yet acquired the skills to meet the demands for the environment. Any human will struggle when they're in an environment that expects them to perform a skill they don't yet possess. How many of you know how to change the oil on your vehicle? Raise your hand if you know how to do that. How many of you don't know how to do that? Now imagine we had some bizarre expectation. You had to run out and go change the oil on your vehicle in order to get continuing education credits, get a paycheck. How many of you can't do that? Okay, you would struggle to do it. If the environment expected you to do something, if I spoke in a different language you didn't possess, how many of you wouldn't be able to participate in this? You couldn't meet the demands. How many of you would then, it would show through your behavior. You would get up and leave, or you'd become frustrated. You'd go complain, like, what the heck? What's going on here? Lots of kids are in environments that expect them to have certain skills, but they don't yet possess the skills to meet the demands for the environment. That's academically speaking, that's socially, emotionally, and behaviorally speaking. That's who we need to serve through small group intervention, because we're giving them more reps to learn skills. Then we have another subset of students. The reason why they're struggling, they possess the knowledge and skills. The environment doesn't sufficiently motivate them to consistently apply the knowledge and skills they possess. Those are called performance-based interventions. I'm going to get into 2 different types of menus of interventions. As a professor, some of the research I did, if you can get very precise in selecting interventions that target a root cause, your success rate in your school goes way up. But we're really sloppy. We don't have any rhyme or reason in most schools for why a kid gets a particular intervention. Most of the reasons why kids get a particular intervention, because it's the only thing that the school has. And so it's like if you breathe oxygen, you get this intervention, because that's the only game to be played in town. And we can do better, and we can incrementally progress. Hopefully I lay a path forward there. So let's get into the why before we get into the what. I mentioned this, do you believe in prevention? Okay, hold on to that. Let's play a game called agree or disagree, okay? Agree or disagree. When tier 1 is weak, lots of students look like they need intervention. So tier 1 is what every kid should be getting. When tier 1 is weak, all of a sudden lots of kids look like they need interventions. How many of you believe that? So what's the implication there? Our tier 1 better be good. So here's some of the research we've done. What you're seeing here is the percent of students, when we do something called like universal screening, how many students get detected as having a need. And then we work with the school system over multiple years to increase tier 1. And look what happens to the percentage of students who get detected by a screener. As tier 1 improves, what happens to the number of students who get detected as looking like they need an intervention? It systematically decreases over time. As tier 1 improves, fewer kids actually look like they need additional support. Do you believe in early intervention? Because we have to believe in this to actually put in energy and effort to make it come to life. So let's play do you agree or disagree? When tier 2 is weak, lots of students look like they need tier 3 or special education. So if we don't have an intermediary level of support, all of a sudden we want to use a bazooka when we should use a fly swatter. We want to use a really powerful intervention. Lots of kids look like they need tier 3. The work we do is show what happens to special education identification rates. As more kids access quality tier 2 over time, fewer kids even look like they need special education or more intensive services. Because essentially, when there's lots of kids who look like they need tier 3 in special education, it means we have weak prevention and weak early intervention. Our best investments we can make are in prevention and early intervention. And our commitment to tier 1 and tier 2 is a commitment to prevention and early intervention. So here's some of the research we've done. So nationally speaking, we have discipline disparities. There's disparities in who gets exposed to punitive exclusionary discipline. If you come from a background that's more privileged, often there's fewer office discipline referrals, meaning the adults don't have to remove kids out of learning environments and do certain types of punitive sanctions. Kids who come from a more historically marginalized group get disproportionately exposed to punitive discipline. So I want to show what happens when we implement tier 1 and tier 2 together. So if you do quality tier 2 work with weak tier 1, you can get a little bump. You can get a decrease. This is good. Fewer kids were having to respond with some type of sanction like removal, office referral, or some type of other exclusionary discipline practice. When we do quality tier 1 with weak tier 2, we could still get a bump, but the gap gap completely closes when we do really good tier 1 and tier 2 work together. So the punchline here is we can't kick the tier 2 can down the road. Lots of people say, well, we got to just get tier 1 right, and then we can focus on tier 2. You're going to continue to underserve certain kids because you have kids who need additional support. It's both true that more kids are going to look like they need tier 2 when tier 1's weak, and it's also true that while tier 1's weak, you still have kids who need you to deliver tier 2 support. So let's get into this. What's the struggles? Typically, we do a one-size-fits-all with tier 2. We try to address the needs of kids with one intervention, and how many of you fundamentally believe that one-size-fits-all doesn't work for kids? Because there's different reasons why kids are struggling. And if our interventions don't take into account the different reasons why, our success rate of our interventions efforts go lower. We use tier 2 as a label. We call them tier 2 kids. Hey, that's a tier 2 kid. It's stigmatizing. No kid on the planet would come up and introduce themselves as a tier 2 person. Hey, yeah, I'm tier 2. That's my name. That's who I am. Tier 2 is a system of care that students can access based on need. So we don't label kids based on tier 2. It's a need. We're addressing a need with a support. That's what tier 2 is, a system of support. Often schools don't really have a system in place. They have a person. So like it's a counselor owns tier 2. That doesn't mean you're doing tier 2 correctly. Tier 2 is a team, comes together to work and wrap supports around a student, and that team follows a process. And that process is coordinated. We're trying to get in lockstep fashion, how do we get each step of a support process right? Trial and error. We're just kind of throwing mud and hoping something sticks sometimes. We're imprecisely selecting interventions. And many schools don't get a really big return on investment. They're spending time and energy. How many of you spend time and energy supporting kids with higher levels of needs in your schools? We're trying to increase the ROI. Like our effort and energy is going to produce greater return. So what's tier 2? Turn to someone and talk. What is tier 2? If you met someone outside of here, you walk out of the conference center, they don't even have any foundational knowledge of what this term, and they ask you, hey, what's tier 2? What would you say to them? All right. So the first starting place that we should start with is we need to have collective clarity on what it is. If you go into your school building and you randomly select people and people give you a different answer of what they think tier 2 is, you're not in the same boat, you're going to be discoordinated, and you're not going to serve kids well. The adults need to start from a place of shared clarity about what it is. Do we even have shared understanding of what tier 2 is in our building? If we don't, that's our place where we need to start. We need first shared clarity. Then we need what we call shared commitment. That we're all motivated to want to do this thing that we all understand and are on the same page about. If we're not all on the same page, we're not going to support students as well as we could. So we got to define what tier 2 is. We just think about it like a formula. It's for some students. That's the who. Which students? We got to get really clear. It's students for whom tier 1 is not enough. They need this support in addition to tier 1. They have needs that warrant a support. Targeted support. What do we mean by targeted? We're not just providing like core curriculum, that's tier 1. Tier 1 is core curriculum. We're now targeting something. We're not targeting the kid. What we're targeting is the root cause for why the need exists. And I'm going to get more into this. Like we got to target the intervention, the support at the root cause. What explains why the kid's struggling? Not what the struggle is, but why is the kid struggling? How many of you believe that we need to target root causes? It's kind of like there's a symptom, but then there's a cause of the symptom. You got to address the cause, not the symptom. I have a runny nose. And I have a sore throat. Well, just drink ice for the sore throat. No, but I have strep. It's a bacterial infection. I probably should address the cause. But I have a runny nose and a headache and I'm sweaty. So a lot of times we see the behavior. The behavior is the kids doing things to not comply and complete their work, or saying things that could be considered disrespectful given the context. That's the symptom. The cause is why is the kid using those behaviors. And if we don't know the why, we can't select the proper intervention. That's what targeted means. Targeted support means targeting the root cause. So then we need a method to come up and identify what is the root cause. And then what from these menu of options of supports, which one is targeting that root cause? And I'll get into that. Tier 2 is not a teacher-spectator sport. And what I mean is it isn't something we layer on top of teachers and say, hey, guess what? You're primarily responsible for Tier 1 and you're going to do Tier 2. It's a team that comes together that gets activated to provide early intervention and wraparound support for a student. It's a team process. And I'll talk about what the team does. Like, what does the team do? Well, they follow a coordinated process. So real quick, it's early intervention, it's team-driven. We're going to use data to make our decisions in this, and I'll talk about the types of data. It's about providing targeted, precise support as close to the time when a student's need emerges. That's what early intervention is. How many of you want early intervention in healthcare? For like medical conditions, you would want someone to receive early versus what? Late intervention. How do you then activate early intervention? You have to screen. If you believe in early intervention, you have to believe in screening. Because screening is the mechanism by which you activate early intervention. And we sometimes have people who don't understand the connection between screening and early intervention. That is our method of proactive detection to activate early intervention. Then it's around for 10 to 15% of students in your school population. It's in addition to, not in replacement of Tier 1. What are types of interventions? This is small group and individualized. It's not just small group. These interventions shouldn't require a ton of specialty training. They should be pretty straightforward to implement, and they're precisely tailored to the root cause. That's the type of supports we're providing. So I want to get into kind of the team part of this. Why is it that Tier 2 will only work as well as a team's working? Why is this a team sport? Talk about that. Why will Tier 2 ultimately only work as well as the team is working and functioning? Talk through that. So why will it only work as well as a team? How many of you talk about not a single person can do it all? How many of you talked about there's probably multiple kids, and so we need to do this? How many of you talk about like the decision making? All that decision making shouldn't just reside with a single individual. We have to bring people together. Some of the people at the table have to have kind of authority, administrative authority, to make things happen and hold accountability around following this process. Some of the people have background training experience. They have expertise coming to the table in this process and the types of interventions. Some of the people are just good data-minded people and help gather the data we need to make really good rapid decisions. And I'll talk about the data that we have to have at our fingertips to make really good, efficient decisions as to whether students are receiving the supports and whether they're benefiting from the supports. How many of you have been a part of a team meeting and you have no data, but you're staring at one another talking about a kid? How does that go? Where's the conversation going? Venting. There's a lot of what we call admiring the problem, talking about factors that go beyond our control, that explain why the kids, and then we feel kind of more defeated because we're externalizing the locus of control. We have personalities, forceful personalities are driving the conversation, not what's objectively happening. We have biases that are coming in, reputation effects that impact. We need good data. But we can't get overwhelmed by the data collection, or else we're overwhelmed by just gathering data and we don't even use the data. So we need really rapid, efficient ways of gathering data. We have more information on this, but just quickly, you got to have the right people in the right seats. The right people, the right members, the right seats, they have the right roles and responsibilities on the team. You have to have role clarity. And then you need to meet routinely. A lot of teams, they don't meet routinely enough to even get stuff done. Then you have to have a clear vision and purpose. This is the reason why we're coming together. This is what we're trying to accomplish with our time. We need a process we're going to follow. If we don't have a process, we're all over the place. A process is just outlining steps that have been shown to achieve a proven result. We need to make sure we have data at our fingertips so we can make decisions. And the ultimate goal is we're coming together to provide early, timely intervention. We're trying to bring to life early intervention in our school as to the best of our capability, because it turns out it's kind of complex to pull off. It's easy to talk about. Here, things are going to make sense, but then the rubber hits the road and we're in the day-to-day realities of the work. We have rubrics. I'll be sending in the resource page, like what are the elements of effective Tier 2 teams, so you can kind of assess it, identify gaps, close those gaps through improvement efforts over time, with the whole goal to get up and running a really high-functioning Tier 2 team in your school. So here's the process we recommend. It's 5 steps. Step 1 is proactively detect and triage, and I'll talk about what that means. Step 2 is where the magic happens, because you define the student's need, you analyze why the student's need exists, and you select a precise intervention that targets the root cause. If you get step 2 wrong, even if you follow through with the other steps and implement the intervention, it's not going to work. Because if you don't get the right intervention in place for the right student, it won't be effective. So you want to try to get the right intervention. Now we got to come up with a plan to make sure we actually implement it, and we need to gather data by monitoring progress so we can engage in step 5. We reconvene and review data and make a rapid decision as to whether it worked. But this is where we try to coordinate ourselves. Okay, we got to proactively detect and triage students to identify which students we're going to implement Tier 2 for. Now we got our students who we want to start Tier 2 for, and we need to do define, analyze, and select. And we just start getting in reps. How do you get good at doing anything? Practice and reps. That's how any human gets good at anything, is having a process, following that process, and getting in reps doing the thing. So let's get into this. Proactive detection is really about gathering information to proactively detect a need, so you can activate early, timely intervention. Screening, universal screening, is just one form of proactive detection. How many of you have a universal screening tool? Like a validated instrument you implement routinely. So the whole goal is to gather data at certain time points of the year. That then brings to the attention of the team which students may have a need. May is the operative term. Which students may have a need for tier 2 support. Just because you detected the need doesn't mean you're on the hook to deliver tier 2. Let me give you an example. How many of you go to a doctor for a checkup? What is one of the metrics they take on you almost every time? Blood pressure. So if you came in, I'm your primary care physician, and I took your blood pressure and it was high, would that mean I automatically have to do open heart surgery on you? No. It would say the screener won't tell you what to do. Screeners are good at detecting a need, but it won't tell you what to do. I may find that the blood pressure reading was an error because you walked up a bunch of steps and had coffee right before, and you saw it was elevated. And upon reassessment, you really don't have a need. I may find with just slight adjustments to physical activity and diet, your tier 1 behaviors, it will improve. I may find you just need light medication, low dose. It never will tell you what to do. So we proactively detect so we can activate early intervention, but then we got to follow it up with a triage process. So I'm not going to get into much of this because of time today. But the second part is triage. A lot of times when we go to screen, way more kids get detected than we have the capacity to serve. So if you went out, what's the main highway out here? Anybody? So whatever the main highway, there's a big accident. We're first responders. We go out there, there's more people hurt than the number of us. We have to triage. We don't have the capacity to serve everybody. So we got to look at the severity of need and our resources and rule people in and rule them out based on who we're going to serve. That's what triage is. We do the same thing in schools. We screen and we realize we only can serve 20 kids in tier 2, but we detected 35. Now we need to triage. Which kids do we rule in? Which ones do we rule out and push back into tier 1? So that's what triage is. We have what is called a roll in, roll out process. The roll in, roll out gives us a final list of kids for whom we're going to start tier 2 supports with. So we got to get good at detection and triage. If you don't detect the need, we can't intervene. And often when we go detect needs, we end up finding way more kids look like they need an intervention than we have the capacity to serve. So we need triage. That's what the language we tend to use. So base rate, 24%. You only can serve 12% of your schools. Uh-oh. Now we got to triage. So we got to triage to roll into tier 2 12% of the 24%. And we're going to have to roll out. We need a process to do this. So we get really good. That's what the team does. So you screen, you have your list. That's your first list. Then you do the triage process, you roll in kids and you roll out kids. Now we can start tier 2 with like a cohort of kids. And this is just an image of that process that we try to get really good. Proactively detect, triage, roll in, roll out, and then we start fundamentally tier 2. Turn and stare at someone, not creepy, but in the normal way. And see if you can explain the importance of both detection and triage. Like why do we need both of these processes in our tier 2? Go for it. All right, so proactive detection, it's our effort to detect the need. If we're not actively and proactively trying to detect needs, we go from early intervention to late intervention. How many of you don't want to go all in on late intervention? Like, let's get really good at delayed late intervention when the problem gets bigger. Most of us like, no way we won't. So we got to get good at proactive detection. Then we got to recognize that if we do that, we may end up identifying way more kids who look like they need an intervention than we can serve with our current resources. So we got to figure out what our capacity is, and then we got to triage. And we got to get good at that. Because otherwise, in my work, working with schools across the country for over a decade, they get stuck here. Well, we got way too many kids. What do we do? How do we handle it? And then they kind of break down because of it. They feel overwhelmed. So let's go on. This is, to me, the most exciting part of the process because we're going to try to select a precise intervention. This is one of the innovations, in my view, in education. It's called precision education. It's developing kind of algorithms to get at the root cause, and based on that algorithm, selecting an intervention that's going to be effective, based on the precise needs of a kid. Because kids have different needs for support. And we end up leaning towards a tendency to do one-size-fits-all stuff, though. Because it's easier. It's really complex to think about. Kids have all these needs, and I got a bunch of them, and which needs, and how do I... So we need a process, and we need like a method to use. And I'll walk through the method that we've designed and we've tested through research studies to help us get the right intervention in place for the right kid. So, yep, there's a description. We got to define the need. Then we got to analyze why the need exists by determining the root cause. Then once we have the root cause, we use it to select the intervention. Interventions actually target certain root causes, and I'll talk through that. So here's the process. Define the need, that's the what. Well, no effective interventions live at targeting the what. So imagine the what is, you define the need, imagine the kid spitting at other kids, just for a weird example. There is no spit intervention. Like, hey, do you got a spit intervention? I got a kid who's hawking loogies at you. There is no intervention that targets it. I got a kid who's kicking other people's shins. You got a shin kicking intervention. Or I got a kid who's dropping the F-bomb. Do you got an F-bomb intervention? That's not, the question is, why are we seeing that behavior? The why is where the intervention lives. So we first define what we're seeing as the need, and then we got to figure out why. The paradigm we've identified, this paradigm was developed in the 1970s. It was a professor out of Stanford University. His name's Albert Bandura. He's the father of social learning theory. Before that, we didn't even have a paradigm around kind of learning vicariously through others and modeling and how powerful that was. We take it for granted nowadays. That was not conventional wisdom. But he also developed this paradigm called the acquisition versus performance paradigm. And it says human beings will struggle under one of two conditions. If you're in an environment where you have not yet acquired the skills to meet the demands and challenges, you will struggle. No matter who you are. Because the environment expects you to be able to do that skill and is putting pressure on you to do that. Now you think about schools. Schools expect kids to come prepackaged with all kinds of skills. Social skills, emotion regulation skills, executive functioning skills. How many of you have kids who emotions get the best of them because they don't have skills to manage it? How many of you have kids who struggle with executive functioning, like managing their time, tasks, and things? But the environment assumes they have it, though. And they're struggling, though, because the environment, they don't have the skills to meet the challenges and demands for the environment. How many of you see kids struggle relationally? They're lagging in the social skills and relationship skills. Performance need means you have the skills, you're just not motivated to apply those skills. How many of you see students who have the skills, but they're not motivated to consistently apply the knowledge and skills they possess? That's a whole different type of intervention than is an acquisition intervention. An acquisition intervention is a skill building intervention. A performance intervention is more of a motivational intervention. that nudges, encourages, and motivates the kid to apply the knowledge and skills they possess. So if you select interventions based on whether the kid has an acquisition need or a performance need, the success rate goes up. So let me make sure we got this. An acquisition need is that every environment, there are certain challenges, expectations, and demands when you're in that environment. Because school is weird, if you think about it. We ask kids to show up, and then we say, hey, sit down, do this stuff, now stop doing that, move over here and do this stuff, get up and do that, get in groups and do these things. There's all kinds of challenges, demands, and expectations in there. When the challenges, expectations, demands are greater than the knowledge and skills the kid possesses, they're going to struggle. And what we want to do is flip this around. We want the kids' knowledge and skills to be greater than the challenges and demands they're going to confront. When they have the skills and knowledge to meet and rise to the occasion to meet the demands, they're successful. How many of you have ever been in a place where you struggled to do something? You struggled because you didn't yet possess the knowledge and skills. How many of you, with time to learn how to do something, you got better at meeting the challenges and demands that were placed upon you? I like this paradigm. Instead of thinking about kids in negative terms, we just start to say, hey, this kid has an acquisition need. So they need an acquisition support from us to learn skills. Hey, this kid has a performance need. This kid needs a performance-based intervention to help support them to apply the knowledge and skills they possess. Performance is called the knowing and doing gap. How many of you know how to do things, but you struggle to consistently do those things? Because the environment doesn't support you. You forget. Sometimes you get distracted. The knowing and doing gap. So a lot of our students are struggling because they know what they need to do. They may not be motivated or supported to do it at the point in time they need to do it. Lots of kids struggle with performance needs. Imagine you take a kid with a performance need and you bring them into a small group and assume they don't have the skill. What does a student do? They're bored and they rehearse it perfectly. They tell you exactly. That's the wrong intervention. And then sometimes we assume we try to motivate kids to do things they can't do. Why is it that we can't motivate someone to do perform a skill they can't yet do? And we see this, and to me it's a little bit of not intentional cruelty, but it's cruelty because we're trying to motivate a kid and they don't have the skill to do it. Why is that a problem? Talk about that and how our interventions get mismatched, where we actually have a motivational intervention, but the kid actually needs a skill intervention. Why is that a problem for the kid? Go for it. All right, so why do we need a menu of interventions? What's the opposite of having a menu? So if we went all out to happy hour and there was only one drink and it was tequila, how many of you would be okay? How many of you don't even drink? So I mean, like if you don't have a menu and there's only one thing, you can't meet everybody's needs. So we have to have a menu because not everybody has the same need. But a lot of times we approach interventions and we have one thing. And the thing we know is wrong, that's what we're doing. So we have to have a menu of options. But we need a good menu of options. We recommend having 2 menus. acquisition menu of small group skill building, skill acquisition interventions, and performance interventions, motivational interventions that are designed for kids who have the skills but they need supports in the environment to apply the knowledge and skills they possess. Now, given that we have a menu, we can start to precisely select things that target a root cause. But if we have a skimpy menu, we're going to struggle to meet kids' needs. It's like having a skimpy menu of medical interventions that are available. Well, we only really can fix feet things. But I don't have a foot issue. Sorry, that's the only intervention we got. We just work on feet. But I have a kneecap issue or whatever it is. We have to have a menu of options that we can precisely tailor to the root cause for the ailment, the need, the problem, whatever language we want to use. This is kind of as clear as mud, but I'll walk you through it. We call this is the root cause analysis. Does the kid have an acquisition or performance need? If we say acquisition, then we got to figure out and select the precise acquisition-based intervention. So we have a menu here. If we say it's a performance need, there's different types of evidence-based performance intervention. We need to figure out which one is the best motivational support. So we've developed it's called a matching system, where you match based on the information you've gathered. It says this is likely the most precise and effective intervention you could implement. So it starts with a root cause. Is it an acquisition or performance need? If it's an acquisition need, now we need additional information. What type of acquisition intervention does the kid need? So in the area of social, emotional, and behavioral functioning, these are kind of the 4 small group skill building types of interventions. You have kids in your school that are struggling because they have not yet acquired emotion regulation and coping skills. How many of you have kids who are struggling because of internalizing issues? It's anxiety and depression. They are in your school. Now the question is, do you have a proper intervention for them? They're in your school. We know the prevalence rates. We know how many young people come to school and are struggling to emotionally regulate and cope with anxiety. Not just normal anxiety, right? Like we all have anxiety for a reason. We're talking about it's getting in the way type of anxiety of daily life. And they need a support. We have certain kids, it's not internalizing. They have a harder time regulating externalizing emotions. Externalizing means like anger and frustration. It leads to outer directed behaviors that impact relationships or the environment. How many of you have students, it's not emotion regulation, they just have rugged social skills. They have a hard time building relationships, maintaining relationships, and repairing relationships. That's for students who need social and relationship skills. And then we think about students who are struggling to regulate their self-management around executive functioning. And executive functioning is organization, being able to stay focused, follow and remember directions, impulse control. You have students who are struggling due to executive functioning, and school expects a lot of it because we give lots of stuff for kids to organize. We give lots of directions for them to follow and remember. We time things, so they have to keep track of time. And lots of kids struggle with this. And then they perform poorly academically, and we think something's wrong with the kid. Instead of saying, hey, the kid has an acquisition need, how do we mobilize a proper acquisition support? I'm going to give you a glimpse of what this can look like. So you need curriculum, or you need to be able to deliver the interventions. This is the only thing I will show from what we've done, but it gives you a blueprint of what this looks like. This is for middle school 6-8. We have K2, 3-5, but there's 4 small group skill building interventions. We call it coping for kids with internalizing emotions. We have regulation for kids with externalizing emotions, self-management for executive functioning, and relationships to teach social skills. It has 10 sessions. A given session, for example, I'll go into self-management. Students are going to learn how to keep organized. This is what the provider has to deliver the session. They start the session. They don't have to do it, but if they have time, start very intentionally with a temperature check, see how kids are doing, make sure they're in a good mood. They're going to review their previous to-do challenge, which was the thing they needed to do after the previous session, and it's already built in. They're going to review their community agreements to create a safe and supportive place. This is intended for about 6 to 8 kids. There's connection games. Before they even get into learning, they can select connection games to build relationships. You don't have to do that. Here's the main meat of the learning session. There's a script that the educator can use to deliver this lesson. That educator's script is essentially what provides the language to implement. There's student-facing slides where this is what they're going to learn. Essentially, students are going to learn that I have certain strengths and struggles. I need to improve my self-management, and they're going to learn in middle school what a point of performance. I need to improve my ability to self-manage at a certain point of performance in time. It's in the class. I need to be more responsible. And so they're going to learn what they call their POP. There's a certain point of performance I need to get better at because I'm currently struggling to self-manage. Other people are having to do it for me because I'm not remembering instructions or I'm losing things. So I need to improve there. I'm going to have a plan, and then I'm going to have to come up with my own motivation. Because if I'm not motivated, none of it's going to work. And so the provider works with the group to go through this process, but they're going to learn a thing called the to-do list. How many of you use a to-do list? Why do you use one? Is it a support for your brain so you don't forget things? So we teach kids, if you look at the science for executive functioning, it's not actually teaching a skill, it's teaching young people tangible tools they use to support their brain. Like checklists, to-do lists, timers, little visual cues as reminders. So that's what they learn in this, are tools that they can apply to better self-manage and improve their executive functioning. What is unique, we have information if there's a school-based mentor on how they can support the student, and family information. So you send out the families, here's what your child's learning, here's how you can support them in the home, as well as video modules that get sent out to families. So this is where we go from the idea of we have kids with skill needs to actually having the curriculum and the ability to deliver high quality care. Then we have interventions for performance-based interventions. These are evidence-based motivational interventions designed for kids who are struggling. So I want to just go over, as I wrap up here, a couple of these. Does anybody know what check and check out is? So what's the main active ingredient? Essentially, there's a mentor who does what with the kid? Meets in the morning and then in the afternoon. It is a motivational support that leverages adult attention. So we assume the kid has a skill, and if the kid responds well to adult attention, check and check outs are really effective intervention because all you're doing is leveraging adult attention in the morning to set the kid up for success and then debriefing with the kid at the end of the day. There's other interventions that are like class pass. It's an intervention for kids who, when they have academic demands, they want to escape and avoid that. So what you do is give a kid a class pass so they can take breaks, but you incentivize them to not break because they can turn the pass in for something even cooler than the break. And what it shows is kids spend more time engaged in their academic work because they have the ability to break if they want to, but you put them in a decisional dilemma to not break because they can turn that class pass. We've done multiple studies showing effects. It's great for kids who are capable of doing the academic work. They're just not motivated some days, and it's a motivational support, and you get more time on task, more work completion, and their learning goes up, and you have fewer disruptive behaviors. So I just want to end with this. I know we're out of time. You got to develop a plan once you select an effective intervention. There's a process, because if we just selected the intervention and we didn't go a little bit slow to go fast, we sometimes don't deliver the intervention with fidelity. Kids can't benefit from interventions they don't receive. So we have to follow through and implement that intervention. So I'm just going to end with this. if you believe in early intervention, you have to believe in getting tier 2 right. Getting tier 2 right, there is a process we can follow. There are menus of interventions we can incrementally build over time. And the science is really clear. The more precisely we select interventions that target a root cause, the more successful we are. Our efforts to be successful with a kid who needs tier 2, we are actually altering the life course trajectory of that kid. Because kids who need tier 2 are on a trajectory towards negative outcomes often. And we're altering their life course trajectory based on accessing early intervention. We've caused improvements in their life. So best of luck. Thank you for showing up. I wish you all the best. Feel free to come and talk to us if you have some time. We're happy to just share what we have, provide some resources, and talk through some of the work you're doing in your buildings. Thank you.
One more.